Hello, listeners. We just wanted to give a quick disclaimer for this episode. Given the film that we've chosen, The Corpse of Anna Fritz, there is some fairly disturbing content in this film. So if you are listening with a younger listener, or if you feel you're easily triggered by more disturbing content beyond what you would normally see in a horror film, it might be best to skip this one or go quickly read about the film before you proceed with the episode. Thanks, and hope you enjoy. All right, welcome, listeners, to our season finale of Season 4 of Dudes of the Dead podcast. As you would know from listening this season, our theme for Season 4 was to have a special guest on each episode to review a film. And as we teased last episode, we would have a very special guest for our season finale. Now, at the risk of sounding like a 14-year-old girl at a Justin Bieber concert, I would just like to take a minute to contextualize the significance of our guest for this episode. Now, I've prepared a somewhat long-winded intro for our guest, and this guest is the celebrity horror podcasting master himself, Jay of the Dead. Now, I've been listening to Jay for almost 10 years now, and I know this because I started listening to Jay before my daughter was born, and she's turning 9 this November. This was around the time that I really got into horror movies and also really into listening to podcasts. Now, at the time, Jay had a very clever name for his podcast, which was Horror Movie Podcast, which is exactly what I typed into the search and the first show that I clicked on, and I've been listening to Jay for most weeks of my life ever since then. So for years, I listened to horror movie podcasts with Jay, Dave Becker, and Wolfman Josh, and I distinctly remember being absolutely devastated when Jay said that he was leaving the show. I can actually remember that exact morning he made the announcement, and I remember telling my wife I felt like I was almost mourning the loss of someone that I'd taken for granted that I would just listen to each and every week. It's strange with podcasts. They get used to hearing the same person talk to you for hours when doing the dishes, driving in the car, or playing mindless video games with the sound off. I really missed listening to Jay each week, but I also remember being super excited when Jay returned to podcasting with 2 new shows, Horror Movie Weekly and Jay the Dead's New Horror Movies. I think I literally screamed out loud in joy when this happened. So I'm happy to say that after 10 years of listening, I get to hear our guest each and every week when I am making coffee or doing the dishes, and it's very surreal for me to welcome Jay to the show. I can't express how much I appreciate him giving up time in his busy schedule to come on and do an episode with us. So, to conclude my long-winded introduction, Jay the Dead is a horror podcaster from Salt Lake City, Utah, USA. When he's not breaking down horror movies on air with his fellow podcasting horror Avengers, he likes to spend his time watching Forensic Files on TV, practicing Japanese jiu-jitsu, and watching horror movies with his son, Spawn of the Dead. Jay's favorite horror movie is The Village by M. Night Shyamalan, though I'm pretty sure Skinamarink might take the crown for his all-time new favorite film after this year. I kid, of course. So please welcome Jay the Dead to the show. Jay, is there anything that I missed there in terms of introduction that you wanted to add?
Wow, I am just absolutely blown away. Thank you so much. This is really humbling, you guys. And seriously, the honor is mine because I can't even get my mom to talk to me and hang out. So thank you for spending time with me. Thank you.
No, we really appreciate it. It's just very strange to have you on when we've listened to you for so long. Now, did you want to tell the audience which film you chose for this episode and perhaps why you chose it?
Oh, absolutely. And be honored. Yes. So I was thinking Leatherface Lee and Maniac Mike, that this might be the worst possible way to introduce me to your audience because they're going to think I'm a sicko weirdo. But this is one of my favorite films of the 2010s decade. In fact, in my top 10 horror films of the 2010s, this was my number 4. It is a Spanish film called The Corpse of Anna Fritz from 2015. And the reason there are many reasons why I love this film, and I'm sure we'll get into all that, but I love what a surprise this film is. It is so initially taboo and just so arresting. And that is my kind of thing, really, when it comes to horror. I love when it takes me out of my mundane, everyday life and makes me, not that I don't like my life and everything, but I mean, I think most of us have a day in, day out kind of grind. And when you're watching a horror movie and it takes you out of the ordinary, and then you're facing dilemmas or fears or terrors or anything that you wouldn't typically encounter, like what would I do in this situation? And with this film, there's just so many aspects that are completely out of my everyday experience, thank heavens. But that it's really exciting to me, and so I feel invigorated. And the best way for me to describe it, sorry to be long-winded, is
no, it's great.
I don't know if you all have done much ice skating or roller skating, but I remember when I would do that, and those skates would usually kill my feet. And then after you take those off and you get into your comfy tennis shoes again and you're walking around and it just feels so good. That's how I feel after I watch a crazy horror movie like this. When I get back to my boring life, it's like, at least I'm not in that situation. All I got to do is go to work tomorrow, So that's a big reason why I love this so much. I think this film is kind of a lesser known, underseen, underappreciated gem. And I'm so happy to talk to you guys about it.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect analogy. Like, as you painted that picture, I can feel that feeling of getting off the rink and putting on regular shoes, and you feel kind of lighter than normal. And yeah, that's a great point. All right, so I have a small intro for Corpse of Anna Fritz. Now, normally we do no spoilers for the first half and introduce spoilers for the second half of the film. But I think in this case, we're just going to go full spoilers because this is a very difficult film, I think, to discuss in any kind of depth without spoilers. So if you've not seen The Corpse of Anna Fritz, we highly recommend listeners, should I say, go watch the film before coming and listening to, and then you can come listen.
So I just had an upcoming thing spoiled for me.
So this was directed by Hector Hernandez Vicens, starring Alba Ribas as Anna Fritz, Christian Valencia as Ivan, and Albert Carbo as Pau. The synopsis from IMDb says, Anna Fritz, a famous and beautiful actress, has died recently. 3 young men sneak into the morgue to see her naked, fascinated by her beauty. This received a 5.9 on Internet Movie Database and 67% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes and only a 39% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. So yeah, where do we want to start? We're going to jump in with spoilers. Maybe where did you hear about this film, Jay, and what made you watch it in the first place, and what were your expectations?
Well, I think it was one of those things where I was playing around on Internet Movie Database, and a lot of times it'll show you kind of films that are similar or thematically related. And it may have been that I was looking at the Autopsy of Jane Doe or something like that. And then I saw this listed among those titles, and I'm like, what is that? So when I read the premise, I'm like, oh my goodness, I've got to see this. And I watched it and loved it immediately.
That's awesome. And had you seen Dead Girl before?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Yes, Dead Girl from 2008. That is another another very... See, it's... I do. I feel like, especially since people don't know, like, the people I often podcast with, they like to tease me about my sensibilities, which are not abnormal like this, but and it is a running gag. But seriously, I it's just so upsetting and repulsive to me, the concepts in these films. Yeah, like in Dead Girl, like that one is another one that just absolutely horrifies me on some disgusting type of level, but it's also super
totally
fascinating how weird people can be, right? So
totally. No,
I'm just going to jump in here for a sec because I just a funny story. I was donating blood this morning. The nurse asked me, what are you doing for the rest of the day? And I said, I'm really excited. We've got a special guest on my podcast. What kind of podcast you do? And I said, my buddy and I, we talk about horror movies. And she goes, what movie are you doing? And I'm like, I have no issue discussing this in the context of the podcast. But I was all I could do not to say, it has to do... Let's just say it's not a very nice film. I didn't want to get into any details about this because it is a disturbing movie, just like Dead Girl is. But I totally appreciate what you're saying about it's disturbing, but it's so disturbing that it's fascinating, and it's like a moth to a flame. It draws me. It's like, what? Mm-hmm. I don't understand the character motivations or any of those things. So I'm fascinated by what is it that you see here? Why are you not repulsed by this? What is it that you want to get out of this scenario? So it's just really interesting, and it's really nice to be able to talk to other people about it, because I'm not sure my wife would get this one either.
I think that's one of the cool thing about horror movies is they just seeing how people react in these extraordinary situations. Like, one thing I really love about zombie films is just how do people react in that situation, and does it bring out the best in people and the worst in people? Mm-hmm. So this film really sets up a scenario where it's fascinating to see the psychology and how people respond to a pretty out there scenario.
totally.
And at the same time too, guys, I think it's interesting how on some level, like, because this gal is a mega star actress, everybody's kind of obsessed with her. She's super popular and beautiful. There's a degree of human nature where it's like it's the camel in the tent scenario where the orderly works there, and it's like, oh my heavens, this is Anna Fritz, and like he sees her and he's in her presence, and it's like he takes a picture of her face and sends to his friends, and it's like on some level, like I personally wouldn't do that, and people can believe me or not, but I wouldn't take a picture of a dead person, but you can understand why he'd want to kind of prove to them, hey, I'm looking at Anna Fritz here. And then with each additional step with the camel in the tent, it's like you look down your nose at it and you disapprove of it, but you can kind of see how the baser instincts of human nature would take over to some extent until they completely alienate you and you're like, nope, I'm out. I can't see why you would do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think humans like to elevate themselves based on celebrity. Mm-hmm. And it's like anytime anyone encounters a celebrity in real life, you, of course, will share that photo like crazy.
Yeah.
We had a chance to meet Ian McKellen once at Comic-Con, and that was super cool, and we got our picture. But this is just the extreme end of that. But people trying to elevate their status through contact with celebrities, even if they're dead, I suppose.
Well, I think the other thing that came to my mind, too, was, and it's a complete right turn here, is at least how I perceive it, our modern disconnection with death. And if you think about like the original Memento Mori and pictures of death, that was something you'd get, like a group photo taken, a family photo with somebody stood up beside you. I'm going back to the 19th century, right? Mm-hmm. So, but in those days, there was a connection to death. The person may have died in the home, and it was just part of everyday life. And we are so, I feel, disconnected from that. There's also not just the fascination of her being a celebrity, but the fascination of being around a dead body. Mm. It's like, oh, and I really like how you described, you can see each step along the way until you can't, like until it alienates you. And then you think, oh yeah, I couldn't have gone there. I can see this, and this, but that one is a little too far for me.
Right.
Now, Lee, you'd seen this film before. I had watched it because I've heard Jay talk about it many times, and so I made a point of seeing it. But what made you watch this film?
I think it was something similar to what Jay talked about, where I can't remember the order that I saw it in, but I'm sure that I saw Dead Girl and the Autopsy of Jane Doe before this.
Yeah, same.
And there was another, and I believe it's Spanish, and I wish I had looked it up, but it just dawned. There was another one, Spanish film in a morgue, and I can't remember the name of it. So I had seen sort of a group of films around the same time, along the same themes. And I do really like Spanish film. So that was another draw for me, because I feel like the Spanish do something special with horror films. And I wouldn't call this an out-and-out horror. I think that it's horrific what happens in the film, but I feel like it's more of a social commentary kind of drama thriller as opposed to a straight-out horror. But we can discuss that, I'm sure. Anyway, that's a long-winded answer to, I saw it around the same time as these other ones.
Yeah. So I was surprised, and I'm curious what you guys think. Because I'd seen Autopsy of Jane Doe and I'd seen Dead Girl, I kind of expected a supernatural element to this, and was kind of surprised when found out it's pretty much based in reality, that there's no supernatural element at work. Jay, why do you think you gravitate more towards this one than the others? And did that surprise you as well?
Absolutely. And I love that. It is a definite preference of mine to lean toward the reality of things, the things, experiencing the world as I experience it, at least, where it's things that could happen to anybody. That's what attracts me most. So like I see this as something that could entirely happen because it's set in reality. So yeah, I love that. Whereas I do believe in the possibility of supernatural or spiritual occurrences, paranormal activity, things like that. But I think those are a lot less likely. But I could see the things that happen in this film, I could totally see that occurring, and that kind of freaks me out even more.
For sure. Yeah, I think it is a little easier to put yourself in there and think, what would I do, when you know it's a completely realistic scenario, or at least a mostly realistic scenario.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, because that shot where, of course, her head is leaned back and they have that neat point where she opens her eyes and you suddenly realize, oh my God, she's alive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Then suddenly it's like, how are they going to react? And that really is the fun part. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, one of the things, the notes that I have to myself, I really liked how they didn't try to explain that. You know, you could argue that it's a hole in the plot, but I liked the fact that they just went with it, and you just have to accept the fact that it is what it is. She was brought in, DOA, and she actually wasn't. And, chaos ensues after that. So I actually really liked the fact that there was no attempt to explain why this is happening. It just is.
Yeah, I agree with you. I grew up with my mom who would nitpick every movie that had anything that was somewhat unrealistic, and it always used to really bother me. So I know she would hate this film for multiple reasons, but one of them being like, oh, that's not realistic. How would a paramedic declare her dead and, she'd come back to life? Do you have any explanation, though, for the paralysis part? That I was a bit... Is that because maybe the drugs?
Mm-hmm.
Do you get the sense it was a drug overdose?
Mm-hmm.
I wondered about that. Yeah, that's what I thought. But
yeah, and
again, I wasn't too worried about it.
And I've had a really weird experience with this film in that I've probably seen it probably 4 times now, I think. And for whatever reason, I think maybe I've just finished the lines in my head, made those connections already, because I remembered it differently. It's almost as if when I revisited it this morning to watch it for this review, I was there were things that I remembered differently about it. Like, for example, in the opening at the beginning, when we see them wheeling her body into the morgue, I remembered seeing flashes of her celebrity, but it doesn't show that at all.
Interesting.
We just hear that. So I'm like, my mind made those, I was imagining what I was hearing. And with her being dead, I thought at some point that they revealed that she had taken some kind of drug and she was given some kind of date rape drug or something that made her very sedate. And that's, and it doesn't explain that at all. And I'm like, wait, am I seeing a different version of this film? It's so crazy.
Would you agree, though? Do you think that's a good thing? Like, maybe that's the strength of the film, that by not trying to over-explain it, you don't have to overthink it. You can kind of just enjoy the narrative.
It is for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because
I find sometimes a writer will dig themselves a hole that they can't get out of. And that's worse for me, because then I'm starting to nitpick. That's even worse than not telling me anything. Like, you've given me this whole scenario that I don't buy at all. I would have rather just not known.
Yeah.
Because I'm just thinking to Dead Girl as well. I don't know that there's ever an explanation of how she gets there.
It's been so long since I've seen it. I don't know, but I think she just turns into...
Yeah. So anyway, I just feel like for me, it's a strength. Mm-hmm. I think for some people, like your mom, it would bother her that that's not fully explained.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm willing to suspend my disbelief.
So maybe Lee brought up this point of this being a horror film or not. And I know a lot of horror podcasters, this is an important topic. So Jay, do you consider this to be a horror film? And I think that's an interesting thing to discuss in the context of this movie.
Yeah, that's a great question. I do personally. I think it gets there. I think it eventually arrives there because, what we're talking, just because of the way that I personally regard what is horror, because what we have is, drama is conflict. And then when it's a severe, out of the ordinary conflict, when it gets even more elevated and escalated, because the things that are happening by the end of this film are absolutely terrifying to me. I mean, if I put myself in her position, it's like they, well, first of all, they've sexually assaulted her, and then she's not actually dead after all, and they want to make her dead. And it's just, so to me, it gets there. I mean, I definitely, the things that Lee said in his characterization, I agree with all those genre. classifications for sure. But for me, I think it eventually makes it to the horror realms or depths.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I was thinking more it wasn't horror. And then in the latter half of the film, I'll be curious to see what you guys think of this. This film sort of reminded me of Misery. I felt like there were some parallels with Misery.
Yeah.
If you consider Misery to be a horror film, like you have two people, they're both being held captive against their will. They're both end up being paralyzed for different reasons. They're both providing something to the captor. So in Misery, it's more his mind and his creative.
Right.
But in this case, it's her body and her sexuality. And then the scenario is basically both Anna Fritz and I forget the guy's character. It's James Caan, but I don't remember his name.
Oh, yeah. I can't. I remember the author's name.
But basically, they're trying to escape from these people who are trying to kill them. And I thought, well, I absolutely consider Misery to be a horror film. So I think this is operating on a very similar level. So I feel like this is also probably horror. Am I crazy to think there's maybe some parallels between Misery and Anna Fritz?
I think that's a super interesting comparison. Like I didn't make that connection. And I think just to clarify, like, so I do feel, I agree with you, Jay. I think it gets there. And particularly, I mean, I think we've all danced around the pink elephant in the room, considering the necrophilia in the film. That's horrific. And then when we get to Ivan's character, that's also like there are even some sort of slasher tropes in here as well. And certainly Final Girl tropes where, you know, she hides from him and you think she's going to get away. And then as the elevator doors close, he, you know, reaches in and grabs her and violently pulls her out and takes her back to the morgue. Like I definitely see horror elements. I think maybe what's interesting to me and maybe why I didn't see it as like a full-on horror film is and maybe, sorry, I'm going to backtrack a little bit because I don't mean to say it's not a full-on horror film because there's horrific things that go on. But what I mean is it's operating on other levels as well. I mean, the social commentary about bro culture and men's entitlement to women's bodies and society's entitlement to celebrity and I think how society feels like somehow they owe us something and we own them. And like, it's just operating. I think it's so clever on those levels. I sometimes forget that it's a horror film until there's something horrific that happens. And then you go, oh yeah, that's where I'm at. Anyway, so I don't know if that clarifies or muddies the waters from my perspective, but that's a great comparison coming back to your initial question about Misery.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's when she was crawling around paralyzed and trying to escape. And that's maybe what reminded me of Misery. But
yeah, Mike, that was an excellent parallel. Wow. I had never thought of that either. Very cool.
Have you guys seen the Pamela Anderson documentary on Netflix by any chance?
I have actually.
No.
I'm ashamed to admit that.
Jay, did you ever watch Baywatch or Barbed Wire?
No, but I know of those things.
Okay. It's interesting for us because Pamela Anderson is a little bit of a local celebrity because she's from our town. So we watched the Netflix documentary, but that made me think about how we treat celebrities in terms of they don't deserve their own like sexuality or how some people feel like they can take advantage of them in that way. Because she talked a lot in this documentary about every interview she did, they were just asking her about her sex tape or about her breast implants. And because she had done Playboy and she'd been nude before, that then she had no right to be upset about being in the sex tape. Because in the intro for Anna Fritz, they make reference to the fact that she had done something nude or she had been topless. Yeah. Anna Fritz.
Yeah.
And it kind of made me think of Pamela Anderson and being that as a celebrity, people feel like they just have the right to I guess, dehumanize them and just think, oh yeah, I can go watch their sex tape. Or every time we interview Pamela Anderson, I'm totally fine. Just, you would never interact with any other human being that way. But because you're a celebrity who's done Playboy, I can ask you about your breast implants or ask you about your sex tape and kind of humiliate you. Yeah. So I felt like that was maybe a bit of a theme in this film, that because she was a celebrity, these guys felt that they could think of her in a sexual way because that's maybe what her context was. I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I see that totally. I think it's another great comparison because we know Pamela Anderson lives close by. But that documentary, you're right. Like, and I think to be fair, I mean, I can't think of a male equivalent, but it's certainly very prevalent with female celebrities, particularly if they've done something risque or they've been, a centerfold or whatever. Then there seems to be this idea that, well, you've done it once, so you can, we own you. You owe us something to do it over and over and over again. And I think that was very troubling for me in watching this is reflecting on that and thinking, yeah, like, how do we treat celebrities? I mean, I have thought, and I've spoken to my students about this when we had the I don't remember the exact year, but with Britney Spears when she had her breakdown. And it's like we seem to, and I'm using the royal we as society, Western society, we love to like lift somebody up, put them on a pedestal just to tear them down and just to see that fall from grace. And it was heartbreaking, right? To see this young woman rise up the ranks of the pop world and then be hounded and pestered and bothered, and then you wonder why they lose touch with or they get angry and there's an outburst. It's like, of course there is. That isn't that how we'd all react if I had some guy with a camera following me around 24/7.
Yes.
So I that really disturbed me watching this film, and particularly because of the male attitude, and it just seemed like. I was saying to Mike that it reminded me of, really struck me that of Promising Young Woman, 2020, and just that same idea that these men were covering up for one another, and it took this woman, and we also talked about Revenge from 2017, and it took a woman to kind of bring them down a few notches and to sort of make the odds even again. And in Promising Young Woman, it has a devastating impact on her for a number of reasons. But that's what it reminded me of in this one is there's just this attitude like, oh, well, we messed up. So now, we need to get rid of her. We need to kill her so that we don't have something scarring our future.
To be fair, though, I mean, I think Jay was saying the cool thing about the movie is kind of putting yourself and seeing how you would react. But Javi does see her as human and wants to stand up for her, whereas Ivan sees her as like a sexual object.
Totally.
That's kind of the two ends of that spectrum. So seeing those two go at it, and Pao kind of struck me as he was a bit of a blank slate and it would just be mostly convinced by the last person who talked to him. So it's neat to see. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jay.
No, so I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no,
but absolutely, the fact that we have these three, I thought a lot of Freud's psychoanalytic theory, where Ivan's the id, and Po or Pao is the ego, and the super ego is Javi because he's the moral one. So
that's a great point.
And I think about that while watching this film. Yeah, with the id, we have the primitive and instinctive, the base sexual aggression, and that dude is just, it's just all about selfishness, and then with it's interesting because Poe, like the Poe guy, the orderly himself, like we know he has a history. It's revealed he's done this before. He's a necrophilia guy. He's an opportunist. In fact, I was reading to prep for this a little bit. If you look up on the Wikipedia page for necrophilia, there are lots of different classifications, and he would fall in the opportunistic necrophiliac. But anyways, I was just curious, because I'm like, well, this is weird. And then the superego. What's cool about Javi is, for the most part, he's moral. But I will say, it's interesting how this film he did cop a feel in the very beginning.
I was going to say that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I didn't really know what to do with that, or what the filmmakers were wanting us to do with that, because he wasn't completely pure 100%, altruistic the entire time, but he was heroic. And even the ego, even Poe eventually tried to do something redemptive, but I don't know. I just wonder about the shifting of that and how we're supposed to take it.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it, actually, because I came across a review that talked about that with Javi as well, that he does try to come to her aid, but he wasn't above acting like Ivan in the beginning, right? He was convinced. Yeah,
it does kind of just reflect the spectrum of human morality, I suppose, that
for sure
you have people who are totally immoral, you have people who are moral, but then you definitely have people who, it's interesting that he does it when no one is around, because there's people who will be moral and you would think of them as moral people, but then the second that they know they can do something and not get caught, then they're willing to be immoral. And I guess that was kind of like Pao, and to a lesser extent Javi. But I thought that was kind of interesting. And then the psychological warfare between Anna Fritz and Yvonne as they're both trying to convince Pao to turn to their side and using like different techniques. I thought it was funny that Yvonne, every time he did something horrible, he would then say, we did everything we could, or there's nothing else we could have done.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, well, actually, there was a lot you could have done, but he uses that denial to kind of as a defense mechanism to make him feel better, even though he keeps doing horrible things, but then kind of secretly justifies to himself, oh, but there's nothing we could have done. I thought that was kind of funny.
I mean,
but true for
it's
some
so,
people.
There's a Bill Pullman TV show. I think there's like 3 or 4 seasons. Anyway, the first season is similar to this. It's about a sexual assault and things that have gone wrong, and just that idea that, you know, you keep digging the hole a little deeper. You're trying, okay, well, if I just do this, it'll solve the whole situation, but that just creates another problem. So you do something else and it creates another problem. And it just seemed like no matter what Ivan did, he just kept digging the hole a little deeper, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is the other interesting thing, not to get too, you know, like psychoanalytical, but I thought it's fascinating to me that you could argue, and I'm not suggesting that this is actually true, but you could argue that Ivan's not a terrible person. He makes a really bad decision, and then he's trying to get himself out of that bad decision by making more bad decisions. So, and I'm not arguing that there's an excuse for anything that he does, but just that I could see, holy cow, you made this terrible decision with a result that was not what you wanted, and now you're trying to make another decision to make that better, but it's just making it worse.
Now, did you mean Yvonne? Because I feel like the film does sort of set him up, though, to be a bad person. They're talking about the Chinese girls in the lobby.
For sure.
And he's like, oh, yeah, I would just pimp them. And
yeah.
They're flat-chested, and they should just be grateful because they're ugly. Like, you kind of immediately hate Yvonne, I think. Like, he seems like a terrible person. But Pao, I think maybe that analysis would work more, that maybe he does seem like he's a good person, but he makes a mistake.
Well,
I guess, as Jay said, he has done this in the past, though.
Exactly, right? And he uses that I feel he uses that as a lever with his friends. It's like, oh, I see. And then Jay, you talked about him being opportunistic. Like, he sees an opportunity to kind of raise his standing, particularly with Ivan. It's like, oh yeah, I've done this before. I did mean Ivan. Okay. But I do understand what you're saying. He is set up to be the bad person.
I think so.
Yeah.
But I just feel like I said, I'm not justifying anything that he does, but I just see that you could see him as the kind of person who impulsively makes poor decisions or says things to come off with this bravado where he may not actually mean what he's doing, right?
Jay, how do you react to Pao's character then? Did you find yourself rooting for him at all, or did you find like you were never on his side? I'd be curious to know what you thought of that, especially in the context of the ending.
Yeah, I mean, he is he is perhaps the most frightening character because of how potentially insidious his propensity to do evil is, because like he seems rather timid and harmless, and to be honest, I mean, none of this scenario would have happened if he hadn't been exploiting Anna Fritz. And he invited, you know, even though those other dudes were pushy, especially Ivan, he let them in there and gave them access, and everything escalates. I won't say everything, but most of this escalates ultimately at the permission of Poe, because Poe, I mean, he doesn't really, he doesn't push back all that much, and in fact, to some extent, he does encourage it. But just a quick, if I may ask Lee, because when Lee was talking about it, it was really getting my gears turning. It was a really interesting point you were making, if I understood. Because yeah, on one level, yeah, we certainly do not excuse like the behavior of any of these dudes, but especially Ivan. But the fact is, I mean, he commits necrophilia and like defiles this corpse, or however you want to define it. But that dude, he wasn't out that night to murder anybody, or and who knows what would happen at the party. But as you said, because of that one terrible decision, and she ended up not being dead, he kept just piling on decisions. I hadn't thought about it like that, and that was really interesting. So I don't know if I was following your line of thinking, but
yeah, no, that's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, and I mean, and as I said, just for everybody listening, just to clarify, if you watch this film,
right.
You're totally cool, necromantic.
Yeah. We are in no way. Well, I am in no way condoning Ivan's behavior. I'm just saying,
yes,
like, I think as human beings, when we get to a certain age, I mean, I'm in my 50s, I've made some bad decisions, not as bad as Ivan.
Right.
But I can remember times where it's like, okay, I did this bad thing, and then I did something else that just made it worse when I was trying to make it better. And I think we've all done those kinds of things. And sometimes it can lead down this, and there's many films, I think, that explore this aspect of human nature, right? This idea, if you want to look at it in a monetary way, throwing good money after bad, you make a bad monetary decision and then you think, okay, well, if I just do this, it'll make it better, but you've actually just spent more money.
Are you saying you make a lot of monetary?
Yeah, I might make some monetary poor decisions if you ask my wife. But yeah, so I just feel like this comes back to something I said earlier about the film exploring these different avenues of human psychology, right? I mean, there's like you already said, Jay, if Pow had said at the beginning, well, first of all, if he hadn't have sent the picture, his buddies probably wouldn't have showed up. But in the morgue, Pow's the one that takes Javi to the back and allows really Ivan to have his way with the corpse. And I think he's also, I mean, there's a really uncomfortable scene for me where Pow and Javi are in the back and he's kind of looking through the crack in the door, almost like a voyeur watching Ivan with the corpse. And
even commenting on his performance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, so I just wonder, if Pow had a stronger personality, for example, and said, hey, this is my job. I sent you guys a picture just so that you could see, we all know who this celebrity is, but there's no way you're going to do what you're talking about doing.
Javi kind of plays that role, though, the moral conscience, because he does push back and say, this is wrong, we should not do this. And that's not enough to deter Ivan.
No, I mean, maybe if there'd been two of them.
That's true.
Right? Maybe if Pow had said, hey, this is my job, man. Like, I can't let you do this. Somebody could walk in. And
they kind of play with that, too, with the diffusion of responsibility when they go to muffle her, to strangle her. And he won't do it by himself, but diffusion of responsibility. Okay, we'll do it together. And they put both their hands on to kind of feel better about what they're doing or take less responsibility.
Now, I don't know how far down the road we want to go before we get into the ending. Because it does, I mean, I did like the ending. It follows certain tropes that I've seen before. So are there other things that we want to discuss or that you have questions about before we kind of weave our way eventually to the ending?
Maybe I'll throw that over to Jay and see what he thinks.
Yeah.
Sure. I did have just a comment about just their, judging their morality, like, given everything that we've said, I mean, there is still some outrageous, just offhanded comments and assessment that let us know that these dudes, at least Ivan, was capable of sexually assaulting and or raping women. Because, for example, at one point he said, "Just pretend she's drunk."
Yeah.
And then at one point he says, "She's just a corpse. We don't even know her." It's like all of these things where his justification. It's like, well, you can do this to her because, it's almost like he's so dehumanizing, and it's not just, I suspect it's not just because he thinks she's a dead body, but it seems like that's his attitude towards women. His objectification is to such an extreme extent that they're not really human beings. They're just, whatever the objects of his desire for him to do whatever he wants.
It's as if he's used that justification in the past.
Totally.
Similar context. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the spectrum morality is one of the most fascinating things about this film. And the psychology, like, it's so interesting, Jay, how you said the ego and the superego, and also like defense mechanisms, just diffusion of responsibility or how they justify doing horrible things themselves. And I think that's very accurate to how people tend to justify immoral behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And forgive me, one other thing I just want to throw in there if I can, the fact that when when Powell is on top of her doing his thing, and she wakes up and he sees that she's actually alive and awake and recognizes and realizes what he is doing to her in that moment. There, it's truly horrifying, and I can't even imagine. It's unimaginable for me, at least, and I do wonder. Like, I think for certain people, this film would probably be extremely upsetting and triggering. But I'm just saying that he goes from this situation where, yeah, he's doing something wrong, quote unquote. But in his mind, it's like, well, she's dead. It's a victimless crime.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, it goes from victimless crime in his mind to, I'm actually raping her.
Mm-hmm.
That is just, it chills my blood. It makes my blood run cold, because it's like, wow, she knows, and this is happening, and it's already in progress. It's already done. And it's just, I don't know, because in my mind, I always go through, what would I do in this situation? Like, from Anna Fritz's perspective, and even these dudes, even from their perspective, it's like, well, what do you do now?
Yeah.
So anyways.
Well, and coming back to, because you mentioned the 39% audience score, and I wondered if the subject matter is what brought, because I think there's so much interesting to talk about in the film, but you have to get over
I bet you half the people turn this movie off as soon as the necrophilia part starts.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm guessing that explains the audience score. Whereas a critic might be willing to overlook that if it wasn't just for the sake of shock that you've done what you've done as a movie, as a filmmaker.
Yeah, and I think you said before we even started recording that they almost cover this almost as tastefully as you could. It's not exploitative in terms of how it's trying to use necrophilia as a way to get attention. It's the vehicle for setting up these kind of moral scenarios. So I think it treats the subject matter in a way that it is like almost a bit of an intellectual exercise and not just there to get eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's too bad that I'm sure people don't give the film a chance or turn it off just hearing the subject matter, because it is really fascinating. All these things we're talking about, I think, are pretty deep themes actually for a horror film.
Yeah, and when I try to sell this to people, I mean, I'm always trying to talk to people about it, and they always come away from the conversation thinking I'm a weirdo. But the thing is, like, yeah, once you get past it's literally the first 20 minutes is when we have that. And so the way I try to sell it without spoiling it, because I do think that's a great moment when her eyes open.
Yeah.
Is I just try to say, yeah, I mean, this film has depictions of necrophilia, but it's more than it seems. It's more complex than it seems, but still, when the minute they hear the premise, they're like, nope, you're a weirdo, Jay.
Absolutely.
Like I feel like this film did a better job exploring those other aspects than Dead Girl. Like Dead Girl, I found to be quite gritty, and I mean, I don't mean this in the sense of like an X-rated film, but dirty, and it definitely left me feeling uncomfortable more so than this, because I think, like you say, Jay, after that 20-minute mark, and I think it's exactly in the 20th minute when her eyes open, the rest of the film is exploring those relationships and those bad decisions and all those kinds of things. And to me, that's the meat and potatoes of the movie, as opposed to Dead Girl. I didn't feel that. It was always coming back to, and there was also very clear sexual scenes in that.
Yeah, Dead Girl's probably going for the shock value of, hey, check out this necrophilia film, whereas this film is using this necrophilia scenario to explore social commentary and actual real themes of objectification and morality. And yeah, for sure. Do you have any critiques, Jay? I know you love this film and you champion this film. Is there anything when you go back and watch it time and time again that you don't like or that irks you about the film?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of logistical type things, like and part of this was me misremembering it. I do wish this had more of a denouement. I wish we could have seen what happened further when it was over, because there's that scene when you hear her, and her performance is tremendous, by the way, when she calls out to her papa. It almost makes me want to cry, because I'm a dad, and man, that upsets me so much. And I wanted to see some degree of like denouement where like, you know, she's, I don't know, not a long, you know, drawn out thing, but just seeing that she's okay and that she, I don't know, that her family knows she's okay. Maybe she's on Oprah with a book deal. I don't know. But just seeing that she's okay beyond what happens here. So that's one thing that I wish that had. And then like little things like when he goes back in because he left his card, for whatever reason, I was like, maybe I missed it this time and forgot how it worked in the past. I don't remember having that critique in the past, but I'm like, you left a card. What card was it out of your wallet? Do you guys remember what card he left?
Well, the only thing that struck me was that maybe he was doing cocaine at the very beginning, and he might have been using one of his credit cards or something to kind of chop up the cocaine and left it on a gurney. That was the only thing I could think of, because I wondered that too. Is like, there's no ATM there. Like, what did you have a card out for?
Yeah.
Or that orderly like comes down all the way down. They're all worried about it, and all he does is like flick off the light and leave. Like, some of those things just seemed a bit shallow, or maybe they just obviously wanted to create tension, but didn't fully think through the rationale for some of those decisions.
Yeah, and Javi's head injury, I think, needed to be a little worse or something. I know we can bleed a lot from our head, but yeah, for whatever reason, his death was pretty quick, I thought.
That was one of my biggest critiques. I have a big note to myself. It's like, really? Was that enough of an injury for him to die?
He punched him like 3 times?
Yeah. I mean, it didn't seem that severe. I mean, the other thing that I wondered, and I mean, it's a short runtime anyway, right? 77 minutes or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I do wonder if there were aspects of the narrative that were drawn out just a little bit. Like, I wonder if this actually could have been an even more successful, shorter film. Now, I don't know what category that would put that in, other than a short, but that's the one thing that I wondered about was, could this have been a little tighter in terms of its narrative structure?
Yeah, because sometimes that's an issue with those films that take place all in one setting, that drawing out enough, like they sometimes have to come up with things to draw it out into a full film. Do you guys typically like films that take place just in one setting for a whole film? I mean, there's a few exceptions here, but most of it is just in that one room in the morgue. Yeah,
I think that's super cool because I like seeing screenwriters figure out that puzzle. Okay, well, how are we going to keep tension going in this one small space? I love that. Even though I don't love stage plays, so I don't like when a film feels like, oh, this is just a stage play that they filmed. I don't like that. I know that's a weird distinction, but I like what's done here.
Oh, yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, I felt tension through the whole thing, though. I never was looking at my watch or thinking the film felt long. Like, it's quite engaging, partly because of the subject matter. But
yeah, absolutely. And I do think, I mean, like I say, like 60, or is it 67 or 77? 77 minutes, I guess, an hour and 17 minutes. It's definitely a short runtime, and it feels, the pacing feels good to me. Like, it feels like it moves along pretty quickly. I agree, there's good tension. I just wondered in a few places, it's like, seems a little bit stretched out so that you could make it a reasonable, like, I think if you get to that sort of 80-ish minutes, you can make it a feature film. But if it's anything, maybe below 70, maybe it's harder to market, or it's harder to get it into festivals or whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, I really liked, we haven't really talked much about, and I don't know if there's a lot to talk about, but I did notice this time, I think this is only my second time, but I was watching for, like, there's a blue tint to the film, which I really liked, because not only does that give you the sense of the morgue, but also the coldness of the characters, particularly Ivan, and just that idea of the coldness of his morality or immorality. I felt that was reflected in the visual choices that the director had made, which I really appreciated.
I also appreciated they did break the tension, though, occasionally with some humor. As a prankster, I thought that was pretty hilarious when he brings them over and then whips off the blanket, and it's like an old woman, and they were expecting Anna Fritz. I kind of laughed at that part and could relate because I'm a bit of a prankster. So,
and that also showed his disrespect for the dead. Right off the bat, we see that this guy, it's like, because I'm sure that when they're trained in that kind of a profession, people are probably taught you need to be respectful. This could be your grandma or what,
Yeah, totally.
Anyways. funny to me.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're not saying, hey, flip off this blanket for your friends.
And the themes are so taboo, it gets you thinking about moral scenarios that you probably haven't really thought about that often. Like, I never really considered, like, what is the morality of doing something to a dead body or taking the photo of a dead body? Like, it's dead. There's no life there anymore. But then you think, well, if it was my daughter, someone that I loved, someone taking their picture or obviously doing anything to them to their dead, like, that's horrible and seems very immoral. So it's kind of interesting that this film, though, made me think through moral scenarios that I'd never really considered before. But you have to kind of think through, as Jay said, like, what would I do in this scenario? I like that about it. It keeps it engaging.
Sure.
Now, how did you feel about the final girl scenario at the end?
Yeah, I will admit that I kind of felt like, I think I changed my mind now, but Pow had kind of tried to do the right thing, that he had made the final decision to help her. He didn't tell Ivan, he left, and then she kills him, of course, anyways. So part of me felt like, oh man, like did he deserve that? But then after our conversation today and Jay pointing out like he's done this before and he's actually the reason that this all started in the first place and he did make the decision to have sex with it. Like, yeah, he deserved it.
Yeah.
But at the moment, my first inclination was, oh man, like he was trying to do the right thing and he got killed. So I had to grapple with that one a little bit, admittedly.
And you know that he had just, like, within the hour, maybe even within 30 minutes, he had just tried to kill her.
Yes.
Again,
Totally.
But I agree with you, though. It's fascinating how they play with you, that he's almost set up as the quote unquote good guy because he tried to help her. It's like, but that doesn't excuse what you've done for the entirety of the movie, or what you haven't done, the moral stance that you didn't take.
But then it also brings up themes of like forgiveness or redemption. Like, you could see someone like a criminal who's done many horrible things, and you can make an argument that eventually you should forgive them, or, they should be able to go get past horrible things they've done in the past, where someone like Ivan is still going to continue to do horrible things. So maybe that's why you sort of sympathize. But I don't know, Jay, what was your reaction the first time you saw this and they kill Pow?
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it was awesome just how, because it's pretty hardcore, it's pretty brutal. And I don't know, I loved it because it would have risked being sappy, but she's like, no, we're not.
Totally.
And that's a super painful death. I mean, to die with a gut wound. I mean, she stabbed him in the gut a few times. That'd be a rough way to go right there.
And were you guys surprised? Did you think that she would kill him, or did you think that she would spare him?
I think the first time I had a similar reaction to you. It's like, oh, really? And then this time I was like, no, give it to him. And I really liked how they focused on her reaction.
Yes.
They didn't, because even though Ivan and Pow were, quote unquote, her victims in this case, she's the ultimate victim. And it made sense to me. I appreciated how the filmmaker made the choice to focus on her reaction, because the film, not just in title alone, but the film is about her. It's about the men's entitlement to her and their reaction to her, and their, like, all of it centers around her. So I appreciated how at the end of the film, it focuses on her release of all of those things. But yeah, I thought for sure he deserved it.
What if we get trained though? Like, if I think of an extreme example, like Darth Vader, who's one of like the worst villains in cinematic history, and he's killed all these people, done all these horrible things. And then he picks up the Emperor at the end, throws him over the end, and then we're like, yeah, Darth Vader. And then you're kind of rooting for him, and he's a good guy, even though he's done all these horrible things. This is maybe a bit of an out there comparison, but
you're right.
Tad stretch there.
But this idea that you can have a supervillain who's done horrible things, and then they do one redemptive act, and then suddenly they're on your side. And I think that's maybe why you get a bit tricked in this film, because I felt like he's done all these horrible things, but he'd made this redemptive act. Oh, but he's going to get stabbed anyways. It's cool that it plays with your expectations there, maybe.
Well, it's a beauty of... Sorry, go ahead, Jay.
Forgive me. I was just saying that is a great point because that Darth Vader was complicit. He was a part of Leia's planet being blown to smithereens.
Totally.
I mean, he helped with that. So yeah, that's a lot of voices silenced at once.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Go ahead, Lee.
No, I was going to just echo that as well. I mean, I think the cool thing about film and filmmaking is that ability for a director and a writer to manipulate your emotions that way. And that's, I always, whenever I feel, I mean, we were talking about this, one of our recent episodes was Silence of the Lambs, and we were talking about how at least we felt like we were drawn in to Hannibal Lecter's character because he's intellectually attractive. He's smart. He's astute at picking up things where he's not the Buffalo Bill character. So even though he's despicable really as a human being, you're kind of drawn into him as like, oh yeah, he's helping out Clarice Starling, solve this murder or whatever. And I love how film has the ability to manipulate us that way to our detriment sometimes, but I that's just fascinating.
Yeah, we tend to love anti-heroes, I think.
Yeah.
And he knows what to eat with people's liver and fava beans.
True.
He knows what to drink with that, what's appropriate.
Yeah, I wouldn't pair a Chianti with that, so I'm
right. So sorry. A little bit ago, you asked, just throwing some stuff here. You asked about other critiques. It seemed like maybe I misunderstood. I feel like my comprehension this time was worse than it has been in the past. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just getting old, but it seemed to me that this began at 11:30 p.m. And for whatever reason, I thought he said that the next shift was coming in at like midnight or something. But maybe I misunderstood that. But I was thinking, where is the next shift? When does the next person on duty get here? And, if we're nitpicking, and this is definitely nitpicking, but like if you have a celebrity's corpse like that, that's that famous, I mean, it seems like they may have had some sort of security measures.
Yeah, exactly.
I would think.
Yeah, some kind of protocol around that for sure.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think is kind of a weakness to this film, if we're nitpicking it, is that the fact that Ivan kept her alive for so long, that was just unnecessary risk. When he knew that she had to go, and especially when he saw that she was becoming, problematic in terms of creating greater risk and persuading his friend and trying to escape and trying to call, I think they would have, whacked her pretty quickly. But
sure.
Anyways.
Yeah, I think we'd all agree that maybe the biggest weakness is if you wanted to go through this film and nitpick, you could probably come up with a pretty significant list of nitpicks. But if you're willing to just kind of turn off your brain with that regard and enjoy kind of the ride, there's a lot to like here, I think.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, go ahead. If you got more, that's great.
Sorry, just a couple other things to throw out. I know these are kind of random, but just a couple other matters of morality. I think it's interesting too. There's a point in that back room, the broom closet room, where you actually have them pulling and desperately wanting their friend to survive while also desiring that she has to die.
I thought
that
too.
Was interesting at the same time to have that juxtaposed in the moment. It's like, I don't know, a lot of times when you're pulling for someone to survive that you care about, then typically we have great feelings of charity and to try to earn some sort of miraculous intervention. The other thing is the morality of, okay, they're talking about taking a person's life, a person who was presumed dead, and she could be revealed to the world that she's alive, and think how happy her fans and her family would be and all that stuff. But it's like, no, we actually have to kill her even though she's perfectly healthy because I don't want to go to prison. So like weighing those two things, I mean, that's hard. It's like you got to really sell your soul at that point to be like, yeah, she's still alive. But because the more you think about that, how dire that criminal line of action is, it's oof. And for Poe, the POW guy or whatever his name is, one of the things that they use to kind of twist his arm is Ivan said, do you want your parents to know that you do that to dead women? and that was enough. It's like, yeah, okay, there's a shame. So obviously he knew that it would be shameful, and he was willing to have this girl die so he wouldn't be embarrassed in front of his parents.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
And which was cool because Javi then says, like, well, that's your problem. Like, you
Totally.
guys made this immoral decision and now you have to live with the consequences. And he was like, well, I didn't do that, so I'm going to go save her.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool, that cascading effect of once you do one immoral act, then maybe you have to do others to protect for your other ones. Whereas Javi, because I was thinking, like, it's easy for Javi to say not to kill her because he wouldn't be embarrassed and he wouldn't go to jail. But he also made the correct moral decision and therefore doesn't have to suffer those consequences.
Yeah.
So this film is brilliant in that it does really make you think about morality in a lot of different ways. And through these 4 characters, just the different, where they fall on a spectrum of morality. And it's not always just cut and dry. But yeah, those are all really good points, Jay.
Oh, thank you.
So I'd like to suggest that Jay can have the final word about, was it own, rent, or buy?
Avoid? Yeah.
Avoid.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just wondering if we kind of give our recommendation or not, and then Jay can have the final word on.
For sure, yeah. I mean, if you're okay telling people to go watch a film about necrophilia,
Totally.
then I would recommend this film. It's funny because same thing at work this week. I told some people that you were coming on, and they're like, "Oh, what film are you doing?" And I got some funny looks when I told them what it was about. And I'm like, "No, but it's really cool because she's alive and it's this moral thing." But yeah, no, I 100% recommend this film. I love these movies where there's a crazy scenario and you get to see how different people react. It's kind of why I love the zombies subgenre. And I enjoyed that. I think the performances are great. I think the movie is tense and interesting all the way through. The only caveat is just whether you can get over the subject matter. Also, someone like my mom, if you're really going to nitpick things, then perhaps not. But I very strongly recommend this movie. And just for this episode, to adopt Jay's review scale, I would give this an 8 out of 10, and I would say it's a buy. A buy, not necessarily because I'd want to watch it over and over again, but it's the type of film that I'd want to show other people. Like anyone who's into films, like, okay, check this one out. It's really interesting. So that's me.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I feel almost identical in the sense that, if I could convince somebody to get past their revulsion at the suggestion, we've already talked about how it's covered. It's not gratuitous in my mind. The necrophilia aspect is probably worse saying it out loud than actually how they treat it in the film, because I don't even know if this is possible, but I feel like they treat it respectfully and it's not gratuitous. It's there to serve the purpose, as you've already said, about getting to the next stage of the film, the second act of the film. And so I feel like, this is a great conversation starter and something about like talking about morality, talking about society, talking about celebrity. So I think if you can leap over that initial hurdle, then it's definitely a watch. But it's a big hurdle. And I guess my caveat would be, this is not a film for everyone.
Just trying to get people in life to watch regular horror movies that don't have necrophilia is a tall order. Like they already think I'm nuts for watching slasher films.
Yeah.
So, hey, try this one on for size. But
100%.
But I think it's a good film. And so Jay, final thoughts?
Okay. I just want to say to the audience here of the Dudes of the Dead podcast, please don't blame Lee and Mike for this. If this film has upset you or offended you, it is all my fault. Just say that weirdo guest, Jay of the Dead, he brought this upon us. So I'm just saying, like, it's not their fault. They said, what would you like to review? And I told them, and they were kind enough to humor me. The other thing I just want to say about this is, my favorite premise, period, in all of cinema, no matter the genre, is, we have a dead body. What do we do with it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, side note, my answer in my head is never what they do with this dead body. Just saying, just that. But like that film, Very Bad Things, which is not horror, but it's really interesting. It's like a dark comedy. Very Bad Things has that. It's like, oh no, we have a dead body. And then, just as you guys have described so eloquently about a poor decision leads to another poor decision, and it compounds. Very Bad Things is another film that does that. I got to celebrate this actress for her performance, her depiction of fear. I mean, there are moments where she communicates fear strictly with her eyes, especially when she first wakes up and she's being assaulted. Very upsetting, but her eyes are just filled with fear. That's incredible in terms of performance. And again, I will just throw it out there. I mean, obviously, because of the subject matter, and we're talking about rape. I mean, this film goes from necrophilia to rape, and so that it could be very upsetting and triggering for other people. So I always like to mention that. I love survival horror. Ultimately, to me, this is a survival horror film. That's what we're talking about here. And that's my second favorite subgenre in horror is survival horror. And it's a bummer because when I describe this film, I can't sell it that way to people because they have to initially think that it's about necrophilia, but she's really just a survivor, and I love that. One last note: if you do watch this, the song at the end credits is so bizarre. It's like the chorus is like "Cats know everything," and then it has quotes from the film, which is really wild and wacky. It's just bizarre. And the last thing I'll say is I do own this. I feel that this is a total gem, and I ordered it on DVD. You can order it on, a physical copy of it. But I did look. I was curious. I went on Amazon, and it's no longer streaming on Amazon. You can stream it on Tubi, of course, with commercials, I believe. But I'm just saying I'd like to put a plug in there for physical media. So for you collectors, this is one to snatch up before you can't find it anymore. The Corpse of Anna Fritz for me is a 9 out of 10, and it's a buy.
Excellent.
Awesome. Do you know if this film is hard to find on physical media?
Let's see. Well, I believe I looked it up on Amazon, and I think you could still order it. So for those who would like, so I mean, I got it, and it was I remember it being reasonably priced. I could look it up while we're talking, but yeah, I think it's still on DVD here, and I'm just trying to find it here. Whoa, never mind about the reasonably priced. Right now, the DVD is extremely expensive, so my apologies. Maybe it's an eBay type of thing.
Supply and demand.
Yes.
You've championed this film so many times now. Everyone's tried to buy it, and you've driven up the price. So
yeah, that's probably
maybe it's finally catching on. But I will say again, though, just this is my number 4 favorite horror film of the 2010s decade.
Awesome. Yeah. So anything else? I think that wraps it up. Jay, just thank you so much for coming on our show today. I know you do a lot of recording and editing, and you're a busy person. So taking your time to come on our lowly horror podcast, really appreciate that.
Yeah, much appreciated.
I've been listening to you for a decade. As I said, this will be a day I remember forever. And just thanks so much. And a great choice of film as well. I think we both enjoyed it and made for some interesting conversation.
For sure. Yeah, thanks, Jay. Wow. Much appreciated.
I just want to thank you guys. That's really humbling, and I hope you'll be willing to join me as well if I can borrow some of your time. Because seriously, I had a blast talking about this with you guys today, and I think we'd have a lot of fun.
100%.
So
yeah, for sure.
That'd be great. So you can check out Jay of the Dead on Horror Movie Weekly and Jay of the Dead's new horror movies. Was there any other social media or things you wanted to plug, Jay?
No, that's great. Just those two. Just check them out. I'd love to have people visit. And I promise we don't always talk about necrophilia.
But you can always look it up on Wikipedia.
Exactly.
That's right.
Okay. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you in the aisles.